Whether or not you are rocking the fly gig and maybe using in-ear monitors, or you're recording from home and you need a high quality bass preamp pedal, well, Trace Elliot have got you covered. Let's take a listen. Hi, it's Dan Veal here once again, and you are watching Bass Gear Magazine. And in this review, we are looking at the Trace Elliot Transit B high performance bass preamplifier. As you can see from the pedal, it is absolutely feature rich. We are going to be going through each section individually, and this is going to enable you to dial in some really great core tones should you be going on fly gigs, using in-ear monitor systems, practicing from home, or of course using this system as a front end to your own recording workstation, be it a mobile system or a full desktop workstation. In the video, I'm going to go over each section of the pedal. I could go into some real granular detail here, but to be honest, there's so much on it that this video could end up being very, very long. So you'll have to forgive me if I go through each section relatively short and briefly. But this should hopefully send you off to go and try out the Transit B for yourself, which is exactly what I want you to do. Let's get on and tune up. That's right, on board Transit B we have a built-in chromatic tuner. In tuner mode, all of the halos around the controls at the top of the pedal switch to tuner mode. This allows us to see exactly how far away we are from being in tune. Let's take a look at that. As you can see, the tuner is really stable and doesn't flap around absolutely everywhere whilst I'm just trying to concentrate on the note that I need to tune. That for me on stage, if I'm tuning between songs, is very important. So that's a thumbs up from me straight away. Once I'm tuned, I can then switch on and have a look at the individual sections of the pedal. First up, we are looking at the compressor section, and we've got a blue foot switch here, and we have two controls on the left-hand side of the device. What is interesting about this particular compressor, and certainly if you know your Trace Elliot amplifiers already, is we have something called a dual band compressor on board. This immediately piques my interest, and this is very, very exciting for a number of different reasons. A lot of amplifiers have a single control for their compressor, and this is usually what's called a limiter or a full band compressor. And what this means is the entire bass signal goes into one circuit, and if the low frequencies are overpowering the treble frequencies before they even get to the compressor, then actually the compressor is going to be overloaded by those low frequencies, and actually the high frequencies will struggle to get through. And a way around this problem, in order to keep your sound punchy and clear, is to actually split your audio band into 2, 3, 4, or many more pieces. In this case, 2. We have a bass band and a treble band. This allows me to compress my low end and my top end separately, and I can use this for some really interesting effects, but also for getting some clarity back from maybe a muddy sound or adding some low-end punch to a thin bass tone. I'm going to dial in just a couple of settings here. we'll hear what the compressor does. But I'm just going to put a little disclaimer in at this moment that due to the way that these videos are recorded and then placed online, there is some natural compression going on, so it makes it slightly more difficult to hear what a compressor pedal is doing. All the more reason to try this pedal out for yourself. In my first tone example, I have turned the treble compressor all the way up and the bass compressor all the way down. So you're going to hear all of the bottom end coming through naturally with very little compression at all. And the treble frequencies are going to be compressed right back, giving us a very round, bassy sound. This is a little bit of fingerstyle to start with. And a little bit of slap style. If I go to the opposite extreme, I now have no treble compression and plenty of bass compression, and I will get a very toppy sound instead. Fingers first. Slap style. You can immediately hear that is a big difference in sound. Now, if we balance it up around halfway, we're getting compression on both the top end and the bass end, and I can start dialing in a rounder sound to suit. This is about the 50-50 setting, and then I'm going to turn the compressor off so we can compare. Now hopefully you can hear the difference. You're going to want to listen to this on some decent earphones or some decent speakers. If you're listening to this on your mobile device or a laptop, those tiny speakers are not going to help you one little bit. But for me in the studio with the compressor turned on, even with the dials at 50% or the 12 o'clock setting, my sound was smooth and it was rounded, and I had a nice bit of punch that I'd be happy hitting record on my recording suite with very little tweaking. Switched off? Yeah, I'm not so sure. It's a good tone, but it just didn't seem so controlled. Of course, we could spend plenty of time talking about the compressor. Let's go on and have a look at the next section on board. We have a 5-band equalizer. It is active, so at the 12 o'clock position, there is no boost or cut. And as we start to boost around clockwise, we're adding more gain and cutting away to the left. I will put the EQ frequency centers up on screen for you to check out whilst I'm talking through some of the sounds that I'm going to dial in for you. Now, talking of Trace Elliot, I remember when I was young and seeing the 12-band heads for the first time, it was not unusual to see what I called the smiley-faced EQ set up on the dials. And this is quite literally setting the graphic equalizer, so we have bass and treble boost and mid-range cut. I'm going to try and do the same on the EQ here, just so we can hear it, and I'll punch the EQ in and out so you can hear the difference. So here's what I've done. I have added in some bass boost and some low mid boost, And I'm cutting the mid-range out. Let's get some more out. And I'm adding some treble. Okay, so this is what my bass sounds like with a bypassed sound. With the EQ in now, let's quickly go the opposite way. I'm going to boost up the mid-range, and I'm going to pull back the low end a little bit, and we'll pull back the treble end a little bit, and I think we'll go for some finger style. Let's try this. Perfect. So if I'm doing a solo, I'm playing something a bit more melodic. This is going to allow me to shape my sound so I can cut through, get rid of some of that low end mass from my tone, maybe get rid of a bit of finger noise whilst I'm at it if I've got a relatively bright sounding instrument. Hit the button, dial in the sound that I want, and off I go. On board Transit B we have a drive section. Now what I've found is I actually like to dial in the EQ and the drive together. Now depending on what instrument and what amp you're using, you may find that your settings will differ, but I certainly found that I like to boost the low mids a little bit and pull the treble back a little bit. And this is certainly a great sound for when I'm digging in with a plectrum. That's really adding a nice bit of grit to my sound, and actually I found on my personal settings I wanted to pull that drive all the way back until it was only just noticeable, and that filled out the sound enough to give my bass a nice lively recorded tone. But certainly pushing the gain all the way open you can get some pretty filthy sounds. Finishing off the front panel for Transit B is Trace Elliott's pre-shape control. I'll put the actual frequency centers on screen, but essentially what we have here is a bass and treble boost and a mid cut. If you want a really scoopy bass tone, this is where to go to get it. Let's take a listen. This is fingerstyle without the pre-shape enabled. And then enabled. Now, of course, any bass that has a naturally scooped tone, you may find that your use of the pre-shape control is going to be somewhat limited. But certainly if you have a vintage instrument, which is certainly very middly in sound, and you want to make it sound a bit bigger and a bit more modern, maybe as if it had an active circuit on board, then you could start by boosting in the pre-shape control and then using the onboard equalizer to further shape the overall sound. Very, very useful to have both on board. Combining the effects on Transit B is when the magic happens, and here's just one example of a sound that I found very, very useful for a multitude of different playing styles. Rounding up the front panel of Transit B then, we have a master output level which governs the level going out to my instrument amplifier. This doesn't affect the XLR outputs on the back of the device. and a master input here as well. Now interestingly, we've got these green halos, but when you overdrive certain circuits on the pedal, then you will actually get a flickering to red, which is a very useful visual indication that you've gone into clipping, and that might not be what you're looking for. Active passive, this is just a level pad. If you're using a instrument with a particularly high output, then you can pad that input back a little bit to stop the aforementioned clipping. Across the middle, we talked about the compressor and the equalizer earlier on, and at the moment in its standard setting we're going from the compressor into the equalizer. But if you decide that you would like to flick the two around the other way, which is a recording studio method, then you can use this button here and it'll flick the two around in their signal path. Finally, just to demonstrate some sounds, we have a bass enhancer on board. Let's take a listen to that. Around the back of Transit B we have a number of really useful connections. Bringing up an image on screen, you can see that we have the input on the left hand side and a dry output directly next to that. This is for sending a parallel output, an unaffected sound, out to an external device. This is very useful if you're running maybe dual rigs or you're trying to get your signal path going off somewhere else and it's not affected by the effects on Transit B. Next to that we have an auxiliary input and a headphone output, and this is going to be really useful for silent practice when you need to feed in, say, the sound of a drum machine or an MP3 player or a laptop or whatever it might be, where you need to monitor a sound to play along with. And of course, as I said, the headphone jack will allow you to use this device without an amplifier at all, just plugged into some really decent headphones. Moving on then, we have two separate DI outputs. One is a DI which is taken from the start of your signal path, which doesn't feature any of the sounds on board Transit B. And a post output, which is of course the output which features all of that lovely rich sound that you have dialed in. Over to the right hand side of that we have another two outputs, and these are 1/4" jacks, much like the input jack, and this is for sending your signal out to, in the case of the far right, your backline or amplifier, whatever it might be. There's also a line level output, which means that you could send this signal into line level devices such as studio rack systems, or even powering the front end of a power amplifier, which means this whole pedal could become your amplifier's preamplifier section. You'll need to just check out what the output levels are of the pedal just to make sure it suits your power amplifier correctly. But I've found there's plenty of output here to drive any of the devices that I have here in my studio. Power comes from an included 9V adapter. Thank you so much, Trace Elliot, for including this. If you're going to be using the Transit B on your own pedal board, of course, just make sure that your power supply is capable of sending or having enough current available to drive this pedal as well. But to be honest, the adapter that has been included isn't particularly large, so you may be able to find that you'll be able to slip that in there nice and neatly. Rounding up Transit B, we have a really nice, sturdy, solid metal cased pedal here that I think is going to take a bit of a kick in on the road and survive to tell the tale. You've heard just a few sounds available from the pedal. And as I said earlier on in the review, you're going to want to go out and try this for yourself to see how it suits with your own gear. And I think it's only going to enhance what you have already, which is great news. Of course, check out the written review in Bass Gear magazine as well. I'm going to round up by saying thank you ever so much for watching my video, and I'm looking forward to bringing you some more gear for review very soon. Take care. My name's Dan Veal, and you have been watching Bass Gear magazine.